Now, over the last couple of months, there's been a lot of discussion surrounding the topic of a recession. A lot of people believe a recession is coming. A lot of people believe one isn't coming. And as far as my opinion and whether or not I think a recession is coming, well, to be honest, it doesn't really matter because I'm just a YouTuber and I am definitely not an expert on this topic. But one thing that I am a firm believer in is being prepared for the worst case scenario. In fact, one phrase that I live by in almost every single facet of my life, whether it be my personal life or my business life, is the phrase prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And I think that this couldn't ring more true than times of economic uncertainty, which is certainly what we're currently going through in January of 2022. Preparing for the worst and hoping for the best is applicable in every single aspect of your life. It's aspect in your career, in your personal life, in your business, and yes, you guessed it, your Turo fleet as well. So that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in this video. And today I'm going to be breaking down how you can simultaneously prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. That way, regardless of what happens with the US economy or the economy around the world, you and your fleet are prepared. Because believe it or not, I absolutely think that Turo can be a recession-proof business. So let's get started. Now, I do think it's important to preface all of this by saying that I don't think that Turo is automatically, without fail, a recession-proof business. I think like anything, it depends on a number of different factors. It depends on where you are, what types of renters you are renting to, your market, and why your renters are renting in the first place, as well as what types of cars you have, as well as the price point, and just your overall business model. I really do believe that Turo absolutely can be recession-proof, but it really is going to depend on all of these different types of factors. Now, before we dig in, if you guys could do me a huge favor and if you could hit the like button and hit the notification bell for the YouTube algorithm, I would greatly appreciate it. This helps my channel grow because it helps that YouTube know that you guys are enjoying my content, and thus YouTube pushes my content out to a new audience. So if you could do that, I would greatly appreciate it. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's dig into the video and let's talk about some of these factors that come into play whenever we're talking about a recession-proof Turo fleet. Now, really, the number one factor that's going to come into play here is really probably the one that is the most out of your control, and that is where you're located and thus what types of renters you're attracting. Now, the reality is, depending on where you live is going to drastically affect what type of Turo fleet you run. For example, if you're in a really tourist-heavy area, for example, Hawaii, Florida, even California, you're going to be targeting a lot of tourists, a lot of people that are coming to you for a vacation. This means that if you're in these types of markets, you are most likely going to be hit by a recession much harder than you would be if you're in an area like, for example, Dallas-Fort Worth, where the vast majority of my renters are people that live here, or alternatively, people that are visiting family or people that are here for work. There are very few people that are just straight up going to Dallas for vacation. Most of the people already live here or have a real reason to be here other than vacation. Whenever we talk about markets that are going to be drastically affected by a recession, the markets that are tourist heavy are definitely going to be the ones that are most impacted. Now, though I do think it's incredibly important to understand what type of market you're in and thus what types of renters you're targeting, I also think it's important to understand that you can make any market recession-proof. But the reason why you should know what type of market you're in is so that you know what steps you need to take in order to make the market recession-proof. Because markets in Hawaii are going to have to do different things than markets in Dallas, than markets in Colorado, than markets in Washington. Every state and every market is different. And before you can make your business recession-proof, you first have to understand what market you're in and who you're targeting. Now, if you're in a market that is incredibly tourist heavy, like these markets that I mentioned a few moments ago, for example, Florida or Hawaii, then you are probably used to targeting predominantly tourists, meaning people that are coming to your city for vacation. That also means that your business is probably more cyclical than other markets around the United States. Let's say, for example, you have a fleet in Florida and you're targeting mainly people that are visiting Florida for vacation. Well, your vehicle needs and the cars that you own are going to be heavily catered to this audience. So you'll go out and you'll buy cars like Jeep Wranglers because those are the cool cars to drive, convertibles because that's what people want to drive on vacation, maybe a couple of large SUVs to cater to that family demographic. You are going to cater the vehicles that you own to those people that are coming to your city and state for vacation. But what happens if there is a recession and if there is a tourist slowdown? Well, the needs of your local residents are going to be very different than the needs of tourists that are visiting your city. And so because of that, it could be a good idea to buy some vehicles that cater to locals rather than to tourists. For example, fuel economy is a factor that people coming for vacation may not pay a whole lot of attention to, but it may be a big factor to somebody who needs a car to get from point A to point B because their car broke down or their car's in the shop or they simply need to rent a car while they're looking for a new car. Fuel economy is a factor that tourists don't pay attention to, but locals certainly do. Another aspect is affordability. People are more willing to spend money whenever they're on vacation, but if they're needing a car because they don't have a car currently, price may be the number one factor that dictates which cars they rent and which ones they don't. So buying cars that are not only fuel efficient, but also very price conscious could be a really great way to implement some recession-proof vehicles into your fleet. Now, I'm not telling you that you should pivot your entire rental strategy regardless of which market you're in and you should start buying cheap, low-end economy cars like I do. That is definitely not what I'm saying because that wouldn't work either. But what I am saying is that right now could be a good time to start thinking about the idea of implementing some of these different types of cars into your fleet. If you're somebody that's wanting to buy another car and you don't have any fuel-efficient cars, maybe it would be a good idea to add one. If you're somebody that rents out high-end luxury cars, maybe it would be a good idea to buy some low-end cars to mix some things up. At the end of the day, diversification is going to be your friend whenever it comes to dealing with any sort of market downturn or any sort of recession. Now, diversification in your fleet, knowing your market, and targeting locals are really going to be the three biggest factors whenever it comes to recession-proofing your Turo business, but there are some other important things to keep in mind. And first and foremost is ensuring that you aren't over-leveraging yourself with debt. Whenever it comes to your Turo business, you are going to be in a really good position if you can handle not having as many rentals and you're not making as much money, but you're also not losing money either. This is something that many Turo hosts experienced just a couple of years ago in 2020 during the pandemic. In fact, it's crazy to say just a couple of years ago in relation to the pandemic because it's now officially almost been 2 years since this entire fiasco began. But I remember quite vividly in April of 2020, Turo hosts were struggling. People were not renting cars. Nationwide lockdowns were meaning that people had their fleets sitting for weeks, if not in some cases months at a time, and people were losing their shirts. In fact, me in Texas, even I had my car sitting for multiple weeks at a time because people just weren't renting cars. During this period of time, there were fleet owners that had fleets of financed cars, and while their cars were sitting in their parking lots collecting dust, they were still having to pay off thousands of dollars in car notes every single month. And these hosts lost their shirt really, really quickly. And this is unfortunately a story that I still hear to this day. I hear hosts that buy a bunch of cars really quickly, they finance them all, they realize that Turo isn't exactly what they thought it would be, and now they're losing a ton of money. While on the flip side, there are other hosts that have bought their cars strategically, predominantly in cash or at the very least while not over leveraging themselves, and these hosts are able to float by even during times of slow periods. For example, during the pandemic, these hosts just simply had to wait until business picked back up. Yeah, they weren't making a lot of money, but they also weren't losing a lot of money either. They were really in a sweet spot so that they could wait out the storm and then hit the ground running once things returned to normal. I know at this point I sound like a broken record, and to be honest, I'll probably continue to sound like a broken record because this is one of the most important things to remember with Turo. Make sure that you stay liquid, make sure that you don't over leverage yourself with debt, and make sure that you're in a position to wait out any storm, whether that storm is a pandemic or a recession or whatever the case is. The hosts that will walk away from any negative downturn will always be the ones that have made sure that they are not over leveraged with debt, that they are prepared to wait it out, and that they have the cash flow that they need to really wait out any storm. The ones that have over leveraged themselves with debt are the ones that are going to be caught in a really, really bad situation. I'm not saying that you need to buy every car with cash, but make sure that you're buying your cars strategically and with a game plan in mind. The last tip that I have for you is very similar to a point that I made in a video I published last week, and this is in regards to pricing. Now, whenever things are busy and whenever Turo is just like popping off, pricing is really easy because you can typically price your cars at a premium and they're going to get rented out regardless. This is obviously nice and it's the ideal situation, but it's not always reality. Whenever things start to dip down, that's whenever pricing can get a little bit more tricky, and it also requires more work on your end. I would encourage you that if you start to see your business kind of tick down a bit, if you see your rentals decrease, really start to stay on top of pricing. For example, during the holidays, I was able to price all of my cars at basically all-time high prices, and I never really had to look at them for like 3 months. They were just constantly getting booked out. But in the month of January, things have slowed down a bit just because of cyclical reasons, and as a result, I am now staying on top of my pricing on a near daily basis. If a car is sitting for more than 24 hours, I will go in and I'll decrease the pricing temporarily, and I do this for every single one of my cars. I also pay attention to when holidays are so that I can up the price a bit, when the weekends are so that weekends have a higher rate than weekdays. I really pay attention to when my cars are sitting, when they're getting booked out, and what type of pricing structure works the best. Whenever things aren't going like 100% well, it's a really good idea to pay attention to your pricing as close as possible and to adjust them on an almost daily basis. That way you can make sure that your pricing is meeting demand and meeting the market, but that you're also not leaving money on the table either. There really isn't any sort of perfect formula with this, at least I haven't found one. If you guys have a perfect process, I would love to hear it. But really what I do is, truly is, if a car is sitting for more than 12 to 24 hours, I go in, I decrease the price, I see if it books out, and I would say 95% of the time it does. If it doesn't get booked out at that price decrease, I'll go in and decrease it once again. And then I'll repeat that process over and over and over again until my fleet is 100% utilized. Now, this is kind of also where I think that financing vehicles versus paid for cash vehicles can come into play. Because if you have a financed car, there are going to be some situations where you are better off having your car sit than having it get rented out. For example, with my Maserati Ghibli, which has since tragically passed away, but with our Maserati Ghibli, we would rather have it sit or have us drive it than rent it for less than $80 per day. Like, we simply were not interested in renting it for a really cheap price, because that's whenever you start losing money unintentionally. But if it's my Ford Focus that's paid for and actually has been paid for probably 3 or 4 times over, then I can rent that car for virtually anything. That car is profitable and would be profitable whether I priced it at $30 per day or honestly $15 per day. So you have to keep that in mind, and that's kind of another facet that does come into play whenever we talk about finance cars versus cash cars. You definitely have more flexibility, you have more room and more margin with cash cars than you do for finance cars, and this of course will help whenever things aren't going super well. Ultimately though, whenever it comes to recession proofing your business, I think that the main key is targeting locals and finding those economic value cars. I think that the hosts that really struggle during any sort of recession are going to be the ones that are renting high-end luxury cars, because the market for these cars is going to go down if we hit a recession. I'm not saying that the market's going to disappear, but it certainly is going to decrease. Whereas I think that you give yourself a little bit of safety net if you start implementing some of these lower end economy cars into your fleet, the ones that target locals that are being price conscious. But like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it. So make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.